Hi everyone, Liam Day from the Top Class Teacher System here with another video. Today we're going to be focusing on something that students generally lack ability to do and also that they really don't enjoy, and that is working on their writing. Now what I'm going to give to you today is a set of tips that I give to my students to noticeably improve their written skills. So let's get started. First of all, it's important to use a wide range of vocabulary and grammar. But I always tell students, don't use those that you are not more than 80% confident with. What I mean by this is that students have a tendency, when you tell them to use more grammar, to just throw ing, past participle, articles, anything they can think of into a sentence because that's grammar. But the problem is that they've got to realise that they need to use it accurately. And throwing grammar words at the page is not going to help them. So that's where the 80% rule comes in. And I also tell the students that you get extra credit for trying more difficult things. We don't want them to be too simple. But that a teacher or whoever's reading it can equally take marks away from them if they don't understand what they mean. Secondly, if you choose to write formally or informally, stay with that style throughout. You'll lose marks if you change. Now, underneath this video, you'll notice that there are some attachments. I've actually attached a really nice formal, informal activity that you can do with students at this point if you want, or in a later lesson. It's completely down to you. Number 3, do not repeat yourself. Students often have quite limited vocabularies, or they lack adventure, and they'll use the same word or the same phrase over and over again in their writing. Now obviously this causes a problem because English really hates repetition, and I usually give them a simple example that they can work with, which is this. I like shoes. My favourite shoes are my brown shoes. And I ask them how that sounds. And inevitably, they tell me it sounds bad. So we look at the different ways that we could make this sentence much better. So, for example, it could be that we change this into ones. Yeah. We could also remove those. So we've taken away the repetition of shoes, but we could also change this word for a synonym like boots. Now this is a very, very simple example, but it helps the students to understand why we can't just repeat the same words or the same phrases over and over again. Okay, tip number 4 is to use a variety of linkers to help the work to flow. I spend a lot of time working with students on sentence length. Some nationalities, they prefer very short, punchy sentences. Others prefer to have sentences that last 3 or 4 lines. These are equally as bad. And the way that I usually explain linkers to the students is if you're building a wall, you have to have the cement between the bricks. I normally draw a picture. I won't now because my artwork is terrible. Okay, again, below here, if you click, you will find a good activity for practicing linkers, introducing different linkers to students. I also tell them never to repeat, a linker more than twice in a single piece of writing. Often students will pick a new linker, like furthermore, and it will just be furthermore, 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 furthermore. They've got to have a range of those linkers. And then we come to one of my pet hates, and that is do not start sentences with and or but. Students know these words, they're comfortable with these words, but they start sentences with them. And we have so many better words that we can start sentences with. So instead of and, we've got furthermore, we've got moreover, we've got in addition. Instead of but, we've got however, we've got on the other hand, we've got in contrast. But it's really hard to break the habit of the students of starting sentences with these. Okay, next one is do not make lists. Now, if you're teaching an exam class, you will know that often, I think in all cases, students are told that there is a word limit. Sometimes, let's say 160 words, minimum word limit. And students have counted their words and it's only 140. So they take a sentence like, I enjoy sports, such as boxing and cricket, and they make it into this really long sentence of, I like sports, such as boxing, cricket, horse racing, motor racing, tennis, football, basketball, swimming, ice hockey, and they just list every sport they can think of. But they have to realise this adds nothing to their work. Okay, what they could do is they could use those extra 20 words to add another sentence, a complete sentence that will help to explain what they were saying. After that, now this is a rather silly example, but I like silly examples because I want the students to remember what I'm talking about when I talk about writing. And that is, remember your reader. You'll be assessed on the language you choose for the reader. Referring to your friend as dear sir or your teacher as bro will lose you marks. And I tell the students to imagine you are talking to that person. What vocabulary would you choose? Now you might want to do a little bit of a role play here where you bring a confident student up to the front and you tell them to imagine that you are their brother. And you have a conversation with them. Then you change and you ask them to imagine that you are their boss. How would they speak to their boss? Would they change their words? Can be quite enlightening. Okay, the next one is one of my favourites, and that's be aware of punctuation. I talked already about very long sentences and very short sentences, but I'd like to show you some of the examples of how I make punctuation more memorable. So, here we've got two simple sentences. Now, when I'm explaining writing, I'm always explaining as simply as I can. So, I went to a party, it was great. Now, there's no grammar mistakes in here, there are no spelling mistakes in here. Alright? But students often don't realise that this is not good writing style. That we need to connect these two sentences. Now, it's perfectly okay to add a linker. So we can simply say, and it was great. But there are other things that we can do and other things that we shouldn't do that students need to know. So, if they're writing informally, I find that students have never really come across or been exposed to the dash, and it's really important in informal English writing. So, I went to a party, dash, it was great. And I tell them that this part of the sentence comments on this part. At this stage, you might want to do a few more examples. You might want to start a sentence and then ask the students to complete it after a dash. That's totally up to you. Oops. Okay. Then we come to the next one. I went to a party. It was great. We put the exclamation mark in there. But sometimes students like to put lots of exclamation marks. Obviously this is bad writing style, and the way I usually explain it is I say, this says, I went to a party, it was great. And this one says, I went to a party, it was great! So that they understand that the more exclamation marks they put, the louder they are shouting at the reader. And finally, trying to stop students using this. Now, I've found that this is predominantly Spanish-speaking students, but I've seen other students use it as well, and that is the triple dot instead of the dash, or instead, in formal writing, of the semicolon. Now, I usually explain this as dun dun dun. So I normally say that to students, the man walked into the room and screamed. Dun dun dun. Turn the page. Because a skeleton fell from the ceiling. They've got to realise that where they want to use this, we would use that for dramatic emphasis. I don't normally explain the part about quotes, because it's not usually appropriate. But getting them to use that dash or the semicolon is definitely going to improve their writing. Okay, on to number 8, and that is to answer all parts of the question. Now, students often look at me like I'm stupid when I tell them to do this. It's obvious, right? But so many students don't do it. And I like to give them a real life example to help explain this. So I say that, imagine your boss has sent you an email that asks you to do 3 things. It asks you to discuss the meeting on Friday. It asks you to schedule an appointment with a client. And it asks you to make suggestions about how you can improve the office. And then I say to them, imagine that you only did 2 of those. How would your boss feel? And they, with their vocabulary that they always choose, sad. More than sad. Then we get disappointed, we get angry, we get let down. And so I say to them, well, it's exactly the same when you do any kind of writing in class. If the question asks you to do 3 things, you've got to do those 3 things. Otherwise, coming back to remember your reader, which is here number 6, the reader will feel disappointed, let down, upset, angry. It will have a bad effect on their reader. So make sure you answer the question. I also like this expression, quality over quantity. I know it's a cliche, but one good sentence to address part of the question is much better than 3 sentences of irrelevant material or waffling. Okay, number 9 is related to presentation. I find that students panic when you give them writing tasks, particularly when you give them timed writing tasks, and therefore they don't plan. They just begin to write. Now, this can have one of 2 effects. First of all, this can happen. So they start writing, yes, I'm comfortable. Don't know what to write now. Okay. Oh, no. Okay, that needs to go there. And that needs to go up there. And at the end of the task, you get something that looks like that. I'm sure any experienced teacher, possibly inexperienced teacher, is looking at this and thinking, yes, I've seen something like that. Now, what I have to explain to them is that when a reader receives something that looks like that, it automatically has that negative effect that we're trying to avoid. And therefore, planning will stop this happening because you know what you're going to write. There will be a future video on planning and executing essay writing and email writing, so look out for those in the future. The second thing that can happen is that they write beautifully, but they don't paragraph. So I usually show them this, and I say, forget about the vocabulary, forget about the grammar, just have a look at those 2 pieces of writing. which one looks better? And they say this one. I say, which one is better? And they say this one. But the words are exactly the same. The difference is that this one has organised, they have planned, they have put things under headings. This one has answered the question beautifully, but it looks difficult to read. Again, it's that negative impression on the reader. And finally, I tell them to leave time, if it's a timed writing, at the end to check their work. Or if it's a piece of homework, I tell them before you click send on the email, or before you hand it to me in class, read it one more time. Because you'll be amazed at the number of small mistakes that you've made. Things like spelling mistakes, third person singular, he, have, articles. Those small mistakes that students can easily fix if they just read again. Now those are my general writing tips. I've included some worksheets underneath. If you have any questions or any comments, then please feel free to leave them below.